Hello to nurses worldwide. Greetings from the USA. I am Dr. Christine Silverstein, and I feel honored today to present to you a message of hope, resilience, and peace. Though I am unable to visit Japan, home of the 2020 Olympics, and personally attend the 58th World Advanced Nursing and Nursing Practice Conference because of COVID-19 restrictions, I am glad that I can welcome you here to my office at the Summit Center for Ideal Performance, situated at the foot of the Ramapo Mountains in Oakland, New Jersey. Although thousands of miles separate us, we are together in spirit today during a pandemic, thus making our common bond even stronger as we go about our daily work as nurses. This can be exemplified as we reflect upon the meaning behind the beautiful greeting, Namaste, as defined by Mahatma Gandhi and illustrated here by the artist Raffaella Vaso. The words read as, I honor the place in you in which the entire universe dwells. I honor the place in you which is of love, of truth, of light, and of peace. When you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, we are one. Today, I am addressing you as leaders of the nursing profession. According to Max Dupree, author of Leadership is an Art, leaders should develop ideas that liberate people to do what is required of them. Thus, leaders are servants of their followers in that they remove the obstacles that prevent them from doing their jobs. True leaders, Dupree posited, enable their followers to realize their full potential. This requires clear thinking about their own beliefs and assumptions, the role of organizations, and the measurements of their performances. Dupree understood that leaders who excel know their own minds and encourage self-management. They listen to ideas, needs, aspirations, and wishes of their followers. Then they respond with confidence within the context of their own well-developed systems of beliefs. One of the Delphic maxims in the forecourt of the Temple of Apollo in ancient Greece, where I visited at the site of the first Olympics, is an inscription that reads, Know thyself. Many contemporary thought leaders since ancient times have heeded these words, including two of our predecessors in professional nursing. Today, I will provide highlights of nursing history to shed new light on the topics of peak performance using MindPower and the use of therapeutic relations for the improvement of self-care and patient care. I will share with you how two transformational leaders, Florence Nightingale and Hildegard Peplau, during professional nursing's renaissance, paved the way for us into the 21st century to become leaders ourselves. In the context of storytelling through metaphor, symbolism, and imagery, I will show you how nursing history is a living legend that can come alive for you today, starting with this story. Last spring, on Park Avenue in New York City, thousands of colorful tulips stood tall in beautiful bloom for all to enjoy. It was uplifting for me to see them return after a long, cold winter during COVID, for we tend to take for granted nature's treasures. Their blooms represented hope and resilience, but months later, after the petals fell off, the city of New York announced that residents could dig up the bulbs and transplant them in their own gardens to make room for new summer plantings. Digging up the tulips was quite a task. To the garden beds, my husband and I brought our hand shovels to dig down deep into the soil to find the bulbs. It required much persistence to locate them. We managed to dig up 30 bulbs with enormous potential inside. Here is one of them. You may be thinking, How does the tulip, a symbol of perfect and deep love, relate to nursing history? As you will see, the embedded values, beliefs, and principles of facts, science, and caring upon which nursing is based were buried beneath the surface of our history so deeply we forgot they existed and took them for granted until it was too late. You see, the devastation of the pandemic had already taken grip while nurses grappled for guidance from leadership, making us all vulnerable as sacrificial lambs. This vulnerability of nurses was not caused by COVID alone, when millions from around the globe died and were buried, but occurred years prior when professional nursing turned away from biopsychosocial nursing principles of caring holistically by discounting the importance of science, facts, and therapeutic interactions within the nurse-patient relationship. As a result, this imbalance of yin and yang gave rise to high anxiety for our colleagues on the front lines, leaving them stranded, for there were no provisions made to combat the pandemic or to develop effective coping strategies to prevent mental health issues in the aftermath of it. This downward spiral of use of therapeutic interpersonal relations, historians report, occurred as a result of increased technology and the development of drugs, along with the prominent biomedical model, a dichotomy extant since the 17th century, where technology holds higher value than persons. So today, rooted in history, let us begin to view the tulip bulb as a symbol of our potential as professional nurses. During this Renaissance revival, we will dig up and transplant into fertile soil our treasures from the past and take the next crucial step in the evolution of professional nursing as a science and as an art to a higher level of performance. Before I commence our journey into the nursing history learned from COVID-19 and how we as leaders can assist all nurses to use MindPower to overcome challenges, in the spirit of self-discovery, I want to share my story relating to my work and to why I became a nurse. I was born and raised in Queens, a borough of New York City, and I am the fourth daughter in a family of 5 children. My mother, a waitress, aspired to become a nurse, and my father, a postal worker, an investigative journalist. Neither one achieved their goals, but I did in their stead. My mother told me about my ancestors coming to America on the Mayflower and about my great-grandmother who immigrated from Ireland and died in 1919 from the Spanish flu pandemic. My dad loved history and inspired me to become a writer and historian. My story starts at 10 years of age. That year, I look back into my development as a person. I realize now that I was already sprouting into a peak performance coach and winner. My father, whose second job was as an athletic director, told me that, although he worked with many boys, there were no sports for girls. Setting out to prove him wrong, I enrolled myself in a citywide roller skating tournament, pretended I was Mighty Mouse, and won the local and Queens championships. My parents were surprised when I placed on the kitchen table my shiny new metal skates that I had won, made by the Globe Skate Company. They brought me to the Manhattan Championship at Central Park, and there, after placing, I won a bracelet with coins from around the world. I felt like an international star. At 15, after witnessing a grand mal seizure, I realized that I wanted to become a nurse so I could help people like my friend. I entered a Catholic nursing school in Brooklyn at 16. On my first day of class, the nursing instructor drew an equilateral triangle on the blackboard and spoke about the holistic nature of nursing by writing the words body, mind, and spirit over each line. She told us that each patient is a person. This teaching made a lasting impression on me after graduation at 19. For 25 years at my center, I have worked as a peak performance coach, clinical hypnotherapist, and registered nurse, assisting clients of all ages to reach their ideal performances in health and wellness, academics, athletics, business, and performing arts. I have facilitated the wins of many student athletes, as well as Olympians and professionals. One student that I work with, a teenage athlete, became a champion at 17 and stated, "Your work gave me light. My mind is steel, and I am the most positive person I know. I can wrestle my way through life and become the champion in anything. My key objectives are to show clients how to become mindfully tough and how to get in the zone by accessing MindPower that includes teaching self-hypnosis, relaxation, mental rehearsal, mental recall, and positive self-talk. A hallmark of my work includes reviewing the recent personal history of clients with a feedback loop which promotes resilience, even in the face of adversity. I help clients to access the subconscious mind to promote healing. The beauty and practicality of these mindful toughness techniques I teach are that they are portable to wherever one goes, that is, in operating rooms, in boardrooms, in hospitals, on tennis courts, and on the stage of life. At my center, I reach out to those in hospitals, in their homes, in supermarkets, on wrestling mats, in real estate offices, and at schools of music. I work according to the principles of interpersonal relations in nursing that Peplau, psychiatric nurse of the 20th century, introduced to nurses in 1952. Peplau spoke about nursing at the growing fringe and declared that it is more than the 7 letters it represents. I have heeded her words and those of Florence Nightingale and have applied them to my work as a clinician and historian. At this time in nursing history, we are told by historians, governments, and the media that the COVID-19 pandemic is unprecedented. However, this is untrue when considering pandemics of the past, such as the bubonic plague of the 14th century that killed an estimated 200 million people. Nevertheless, even with scarce scientific knowledge at that time, post-Black Death, the concept of hospitals began to emerge, as well as public health systems with new ideas of how disease spreads. Today, 1918 nurses who were simultaneously fighting World War I in the trenches, the devastation of mustard gas, and the Spanish flu, have been credited as being calm, collected, and courageous during the pandemic. But many nurses died while working under horrendous conditions, much like those extant today during our current pandemic, such as shortages of supplies and a lack of federal and public health preparedness in the absence of a unified approach from health professionals, citizens, and politicians alike. Some thought the Spanish flu to be a hoax. The 3 main practices that prevented the spread of the Spanish flu were hand washing, mask and gown wearing, and social distancing. In 2020, many Americans looked askew at these practices as a political statement. After reviewing the disaster that ensued in the U.S. while nurses worked under deplorable conditions, Dr. Bricks, who was Trump's White House coronavirus coordinator, regretfully announced that hundreds of thousands of American lives could have been saved had we been better prepared. Instead, the current U.S. death rates of over 600,000 are surmounting those of 1918. As the death knell tolls to prevent future crises, it is timely for me, as a historian, to share my archival research on nursing history with you, so we can heed the words of philosopher George Santayana, who reminds us that only the dead will never again see war, and that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Today, we remember past through the eyes of Florence Nightingale, who was called to service by God at 16. Growing up in an upper-class family, she was discouraged to enter nursing because she would have to clean up the dreck or dirt of others. Taught by her Cambridge-educated father in statistics, science, and math, she excelled beyond other women of her era when females were deemed inferior in intelligence. Women of her stature were expected to be wives and proprietors of properties they could not own by virtue of their gender. Nightingale studied the biopsychosocial conditions of the poor and indigent. Fluent in many languages, she sparred in court in ancient Greek with men of her class. In 1854, Nightingale, with a hand-selected group of nurses, landed in Crimea during the war. They were greeted with appallingly squalid conditions. Arriving in Scutari, Nightingale, with hospital kitchen equipment she purchased, began to improve the unsanitary conditions that beset soldiers who took care of themselves. With a calm and confident demeanor, Nightingale never gave or took an excuse. Much of her time was spent changing wound dressings and offering individualized care to soldiers who were dying like flies. Based on statistics, she knew that the cause of high mortality was from a lack of adequate nutrition and from diseases rather than battle wounds. Supplies and bedding were sorely lacking. Without military status, Nightingale never backed down from the purveyor who reluctantly distributed supplies, or from the commissary officer she called an unfeeling fool. She wrote letters home to the Queen and her people, saying, "In England, you go upon a fallacy. You think we want to save men's lives. We don't. We don't care whether the men live or not." To improve standards of care, she set up sanitary protocol, which she personally monitored, and disinfected and cleaned up the hospitals, while noting statistically the marked improvement in the health of soldiers. Her statistics proved that trained nurses made significant differences in the care of the sick, holistically, in body, mind, and spirit, while saving lives. She was adored by her subordinates and was honored by the Queen. At night, Nightingale walked the wards for hours with her lamp and comforted soldiers. Although ill with Crimean fever, she wrote home to the families of the befallen soldiers with these words: "If it is any consolation to his family to know that he was not neglected, but had every care that medical skill and female nursing could give him, they may be certain of this." Post-war, Nightingale was commissioned to improve the state of the military and wrote her important work on notes on nursing. The Nightingale Fund was set up for hospital training schools. Racked with pain and exhaustion, she completed great achievements from bed until her death at 90 in 1910. As she laid down the rudiments of the nursing profession on hallowed ground, based on facts, science, and caring, which were further rooted by Hildegard Peplau, born in 1909. Peplau was to the 20th century as Nightingale was to the 19th century. Growing up in a working-class family, Peplau entered nursing school at 19. Her mother did not want her to clean up the dirt or dreck of others. Since the labor needs of hospitals were a high priority, there was rigid and paternalistic discipline. Her first assignments were to scour bedpans, scrub floors, and disinfect rooms. Against all odds for women, in June 1943, Peplau earned a bachelor's degree from Bennington College in Vermont, where females were educated as free thinkers. Her studies included working with famous psychologists. After graduation, she joined the Army and was stationed on the front lines in England during World War II, where she lived in a hut with 7 others, slept on a cot, and was warmed by a pot-bellied stove. Psychiatry was unprepared for the onslaught of war. There was a scarcity of knowledge about mental illness and prevention, and a lack of adequate treatments. Nurses had no prep to handle either their own or soldiers' mental hardships. Peplau took courses at the Officers' Club with doctors. She managed a hospital unit where she developed the first treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, of walking and talking with soldiers. Post-war, nurses returned homebound without coping skills. Peplau developed and taught a world-renowned course on psychodynamic nursing at Teachers College, Columbia University, where she published her book, Interpersonal Relations in Nursing, in 1952, based on what she learned on the front lines. Her book is considered the first nursing theory in which nurses were taught to know thyself through a period of self-reflection by exploring, observing, examining, and monitoring their own emotional responses to others, and by applying this self-knowledge to enhance their therapeutic relationships with patients. Peplau believed that the kind of person each nurse becomes makes a substantial difference to what each patient will learn as he is nursed through his experience with illness. She was an advocate for treating patients as individuals. In the U.S., therapeutic interactions were later incorporated during the 1960s into all of nursing by psychiatric nurses through federally funded integration grants. For over 10 years, starting in 1954, Peplau gave complimentary workshops across the U.S. to nurses, teaching them how to use MindPower as depicted in this Rutgers University ad. As a leader, she believed that nurses could play a pivotal role in the recovery process of patients, and encouraged workshop participants to build on their own strengths and to integrate theory into practice. Peplau showed nurses how to stand up for themselves. She never deserted nursing or betrayed it in any way, nor did she ever suggest that it was less than other professions. She never let anyone denigrate it or devalue it in any way. In 1954, Peplau traveled the U.S., promoting the revolutionary idea of specialization in nursing. She developed the first accredited master's program for psychiatric nurses in the U.S. and created the curriculum for the clinical nurse specialist. Peplau stood up tall to the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, Elliot Richardson, while American Nurses Association's president. Prepared to present her agenda of 15 major points, Richardson showed disrespect by reading his mail while she spoke. In a measured response, Peplau emptied the contents of her purse on his desk, explaining that as he opened his mail, she would sort out her pocketbook. With this action, she gained respect at the negotiation table. The epitome of her accomplishments was the filming of a documentary in 1958 on how to communicate with patients therapeutically, called The Nurse-Patient Relationship. Peplau wrote the script, and it was a huge success. In March 1959, film was nominated for an Academy Award in Hollywood and won critical acclaim. She participated on an international level at the World Health Organization, which celebrated the 200th anniversary of Florence Nightingale's birth in 2020 during the International Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. As you can see, these two exemplary leaders, while they communicated therapeutically with patients, were not afraid to get their hands dirty, were no pushovers, made no excuses, and were not threatened by authority figures. Their work provided the foundational standards and knowledge base of facts, science, and caring, so we can reap the benefits today in the areas of research, education, administration, and practice. Now that we have sojourned into nursing history past, let us contrast and compare the performances of contemporary nurses during the COVID-19 pandemic and those of political figures as portrayed by the media with that of our predecessors' performances during times of turmoil. We will use the microcosm of New York City and Washington DC as the backdrop to examine their motivations, beliefs, attitudes, felt needs, emotions, and goals to understand what occurred. On a U.S. federal level, President Trump and his White House team politicized the pandemic as a hoax, so that facial mask wearing became a partisan act. Our ex-president accused nurses of smuggling and selling personal protective equipment, PPE, on the black market. Within the government, there was a lack of public health planning and implementation of basic standards of health maintenance and science that led to confusion and disarray for citizens. During the onslaught, what were New York City nurses experiencing? On reality TV, the frantic voices of nurses, panic-stricken and overwhelmed by the mounting of new cases and deaths and hospital bed deficits, were broadcast on cable news. Frontline nurses expressed their fears, hysteria, and frustration about untenable hospital conditions with a lack of PPE, testing, and life-sustaining ventilators. An intense angst plagued nurses while they comforted dying patients and staged FaceTime with patients' families to say farewell. In contrast, amongst the turmoil, America's nurses were honored as heroes on the front lines. Thousands applauded them from their porches and balconies in New York City, and Navy planes flew overhead to honor them, while body bags were piled up in refrigerated trucks nearby, and nurses were dying. But as contaminated soil spread across America, not all nurses accepted empty praise for heroism. One Brooklyn nurse stated, "Please don't call me a hero. I am being martyred against my will." In the spirit of camaraderie on a national level, at the White House Awards ceremony on May 6, 2020, during National Nurses Week, I watched on TV 8 nurse colleagues, 5 females and 3 males, who represented more than 3.5 million U.S. nurses, a majority by far females, proudly lined up en masse behind President Trump in the Oval Office. During the ceremony, the president of the American Association of Nurse Practitioners stepped out of line when asked by a journalist about shortages of PPE. She replied that, according to her survey, supplies were sporadic. The nurse practitioner admitted that she wore the same N95 mask for a few weeks and commented that the standard protocol for PPE was for single use only, but implied that during unprecedented times, repeated reuse was acceptable. The lame excuse she used for nurses' compliance to the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, and presidential proclamation was that nurses work selflessly to get the job done, no matter the consequences. In response to the NP's lamentation, President Trump rebuked her by stating that his reports showed that supplies were tremendous and that the U.S. was loaded up with gowns, while nurses resorted to wearing garbage bags. Knocked off guard by the rebuke, the NP readily agreed with the ex-president, and other nurses nearby nodded their heads in agreement as well. A nurse supervisor in the lineup stated that in her hospital in New Jersey, she had no problems getting PPE. Seemingly, she did not understand what the fuss was all about. President Trump later called her testimony beautiful and the work of the journalists fake news. Some of the nurses in the lineup openly giggled nervously and smiled over Trump's expressed comments about negative media coverage when they knew he believed in injecting patients with bleach as a cure and lacked empathy for those sick and dying. During the TV coverage, I noticed a male nurse in the lineup behind Trump who remained silent when asked about shortages, but twirled his fingers vigorously through clenched fists. Watching his body language, I questioned what words he would have said had he had the gumption to speak up. What intensified matters for the NP took place the following day when on cable news a host asked her if she agreed with Trump's correction on the shortages and his rebuke. She recanted her statement about sporadic PPE that was based on her own survey and attributed many successes to the ex-president, stating that he agreed with her assessment, which he had not. You, as conference attendees, may view as an honor the described occurrence at the White House Awards ceremony. However, as a historian steeped in nursing history, which is an epic of oppression, sexism, paternalism, and misogyny, I view the ex-president's behavior at this ceremony as a photo opportunity for re-election and as a denigration of nurses, particularly for females, during the #MeToo movement. To understand what transpired, let us examine their performances on this feedback loop I developed to measure success. By taking a lap around the feedback loop, ask yourself, without judgment, what is the skill I want to review? What did I do and how did I execute it? How did it work? Was I successful? What should I change? How can I fine-tune the skill to improve? Other questions posed located within the center of the loop are, what was I thinking when I was performing? What was I feeling? By using a feedback loop as a peak performance coach, I see how the honorees missed opportunities to advance professional nursing and to step out as leaders because of fear of authority. Unlike Peplau, these 8 nurses arrived without an agenda except to accept the award, but they ended up kowtowing to the ex-president to curry favor with him while cleaning up the dreck of the government with their lives at risk. Was the venture a success? Yes, in that they accepted the award, but not in the sense of supporting nurses by providing them with essential PPE to do their work because the shortages remained problematic. By acquiescing to authority, the honorees were blindsided into renouncing nearly 170 years of nursing history, where exemplary predecessors set the foundation of professional nursing based on facts, science, and caring. By nervously giggling and smiling during Trump's fake news tirade on shortages, the honorees were irreverent in spirit to those colleagues who died as a direct result of them. By agreeing with the edicts from the CDC and the ex-president about repeated PPE usage, the honorees broke precedent with 19th century scientific antiseptic principles of Robert Koch, Joseph Lister, and Louis Pasteur. This compromise occurred without foreknowledge of the history of nursing science development and the struggles women had in scientific academia, where men deemed them too dumb to study science, which is the topic of my doctoral dissertation at Columbia University. By effusively venting their fears of helplessness on cable news during the treatment of COVID patients, their so-called patient advocacy ran counter to therapeutic relations, according to Peplau, where nurses are expected to monitor their own emotional reactions to help patients recover. Otherwise, they run the risk of empathically transmitting their anxieties to patients, thus impeding progress. As if it were a recent phenomenon, frontline nurses express feeling overwhelmed with physical care while simultaneously talking to dying patients and families remotely to convey condolences. What is more revealing is that these nurses acknowledge not knowing what to say to dying patients or family members and were unaware of nursing's past when nurses were forbidden to talk to patients. So how can advanced practice nurses avoid these lackluster performances where they acquiesce to authority of a president who does not believe in facts or science and lacks empathy? How can they equip themselves to defend their positions at the negotiation table by upholding time-honored nursing principles? How can they learn how to cope with stressors before they occur without throwing the baby out with the bathwater? As a peak performance coach and nurse, I agree with Shakespeare. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. Since we are one as nurses, this quote refers to you and to me as team players, as well as the quote, "Know thyself." This requires self-reflection from within. You may not believe that you are performers on the stage of life, but you are, just as much as Olympic champions and professional actors. So, what is the key to success for you as performers to become mindfully tough where your mind is as strong as steel? The first concept to know is that elite athletes view stress as a motivational tool, not as a negative. Stress is a state we must understand and control if we are to profit from it and harness its energy psychodynamically to win, as Peplau theorized. The second concept important to comprehend is that short and long-term goals must be set ahead of crises for you to reach your full potentials. This portable four-step process I devised in my practice is recommended to get in the zone through what I call imagineering. The first step is relaxation, achieved by relaxing your muscles and through deep breathing. The health benefits of relaxation are increased concentration, improved control over emotional arousal levels, and reduction of recovery time, as well as a decrease in minor illnesses and symptoms of illness. Mental rehearsal is the second step of mental toughening. It is a process during which you guide your mind and are in control of it to imagine desired results of future events. You etch a blueprint of these desired results in your subconscious mind by rehearsing through your senses, in which you strengthen your self-image, hone your focus, and enhance motor skills. The third step of peak performance conditioning is mental recall. It is a powerful tool in which you replay or relive through your senses past situations when you were successful. I teach my clients to attach a power word associated with the past event. Then, when under pressure in the present moment, All they need do is repeat the word, and they automatically revert to the past memory to win. The fourth step of mental conditioning is positive self-talk, in which you learn to create positive statements that implant in your subconscious mind ideas designed to enhance self-image, achieve a positive mental attitude, and help lead you toward a specific goal. In this way, you counterbalance any negative words with positive ones. Imagery I created to overcome trauma allows you to imagine this scrub board that was used by my mother to wash her family's dirty socks. It seems appropriate usage, right? For nurses are good at scrubbing clean, aren't we? Begin the imagery by relaxing your body and by seeing a projection of yourself performing your duties during COVID on the left side of a split screen. Notice how you look, what you are doing, what you are thinking, and how you are feeling. You can begin to see that image receding so far away and getting so tiny and colorless that it gradually becomes a dot on the movie screen. Now, wash out all the associated negative thoughts, feelings, and traumas with the scrub board as if they are dirty socks, rinsing them out with fresh flowing water. On the right side of the movie screen, the split screen, now see and feel yourself larger than life in brilliant color. You are the picture of health and resilience, filled with joy and peace, while conducting your work with confidence. In conclusion, during this address, I have unearthed nursing's past relating to the works of Nightingale and Peplau. When nurses are fleeing from the profession, devastated and exhausted by it, and feeling depressed, anxious, and suicidal as a result of it, all of which will negatively impact global health, creating nursing shortages. I pointed out what we can learn and how we can grow from the COVID-19 effect. Important learning comes from valuing our foundational standards of facts, science, and caring that give us the power and the right to nurse with integrity. During the global crisis, we can learn to hold nursing science in highest esteem, because without it, as Dr. Callista Roy, nurse theorist, stated, we have nothing but procedure manuals. We can learn that since the early 20th century, the mind and body became one for nurses, that established nursing practice as holistic in body, mind, and spirit, not only for patient care, but for self-care as well. We can learn the practice of communicating therapeutically through interpersonal relations, and to honor and use the treasures embedded in nursing theory that extend far beyond those of other healthcare professions. Lastly, we can learn to stand up against unscrupulous, uneducated, and unaware politicians and governments to win. The first step of nursing's Renaissance revival at the growing fringe is to unearth our tulip bulbs and transplant them into fertile soil in these ways: by requesting funding from governments, the World Health Organization, and the International Council of Nurses to form educational programs in nursing schools on how to use coping strategies to de-stress. We can mandate continuing education to reinforce learned coping tools to prevent burnout. We can teach nurses mindful toughness skills used by elite athletes to make their minds like steel through MindPower. Lastly, we can set up online and in-situ groups to support nurses in the trenches heal from PTSD and other emotional traumas. During the span of this pandemic, we as nurses put our best foot forward under deplorable conditions for which we should be proud. Now, we can freely advance from victimhood to victory. To give us solace as nurse leaders and to lighten our steps skating forward, I will end with Nightingale's words: "Let us be anxious to do well, not for selfish praise, but to honor and advance the cause, the work we have taken up." Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you today. For now, until we meet again, Namaste. Provided here on this slide is a list of recommended readings and videos.